thank you very much. Thank you for sticking around. We're going to be talking a bit more. We've heard a lot about various techniques of reaching the consumer. We're going to be talking today about how the consumer has responded to us and our research. And as it says, talk about, what is it that distinguishes high-end consumers who really are the driving force behind the vast majority of wineries who are attending here. Even though it's not the highest volume, it's a very large portion of revenues in the industry. And the people we talk to are people who buy regularly in that segment. And Darcen will be giving you a bit tighter definition of that as we go along. So I guess I will get right into it. What are we going to talk about? I'm going to give a little bit of background to the high-end wine consumer research we did and why it was done and what the goals were. I'm also going to give some background data from other research sources that will really, I think, give you an idea of, it'll provide some context, and it will also give you an idea of how this research fits in with other research that has been done. Darcen will be able to go over the research, the key findings that we thought would be most interesting to you in detail, and we'll go over a few key takeaways that we thought might be useful for your marketing and sales, because this is, of course, the sales symposium, and then we'll be available for Q&A. So who are we? Why should you pay any attention to us? I'm the research director for the Wine Market Council, which is a nonprofit organization with members in all tiers of the industry, from growers and big and small wineries all the way through the 3 tiers to importers, retailers, as well as suppliers, consultants, academics, etc. The role of the Wine Market Council is to do fundamental research on U.S. wine consumers and wine consumer trends that has broad application across the industry. And we share our results in detail with our members and in broader amounts at symposiums like this, and with press releases occasionally and things like that. It has several uses to the members, so I encourage you to look into it if you are at all interested in finding out more about the consumer. For the larger brands and sort of multi-winery conglomerates, you may have your own research initiatives. It enables those to focus on the brand, because the Wine Market Council will provide the consumer fundamental research. If you don't have the money for a research, it's a great bargain, because you're getting tens and if not hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of research for the price of membership. So shameless sales pitch over. I'm also the proprietor of Full Glass Research, which does economic and market research for producers of what I like to call yummy things, high-end cheese, cider, beer, wineries, wine regions, etc. And with that, I'll turn it over to Darcen to introduce himself.
Thanks. So I'm Darcen Esau. I am the co-founder and owner of Terroir Consulting. So along with my business partner, Arnica Rowan, and we are an international wine research and development company. So we do a lot of consumer research, like I'll be presenting today. We do a lot of market research and marketing plans, export research and export intelligence and export plans for wineries and wine regions. So we really love working with, at the winery level, with wine regions, with wine associations all around the world. And I'll try and sprinkle in a couple stories of the projects that we've been doing to kind of bring the presentation to life as we're going through. And I think some of you recognize me here today. I'm also the co-owner of Taste Advisors. We do a white-labeled wine tourism app for wine regions. And so wine regions will white label that, and that's something that we kind of do on the side. And it's a lot of fun, and I think some of you recognize me from that. So super excited to be here and present this research. And I will be at the networking event afterwards. So if you haven't said hello, please come up and say hello.
Yeah, I should mention also, before I got fully into research, I had experience as a brand manager and in actual sales at the retail and winery level with very large and very small brands. So if you want to ask me sort of practical questions, I do have some experience in that area too. Let's go into this. The high-end consumer research that was commissioned by the Wine Market Council during 2023, and it lasted from mid-2023 all the way up till November. It had several goals to, first of all, explore the accuracy of self-reported spend among wine consumers. I'll have a little bit more to talk about that later. Understand the drinking occasions for wine over $20, which have actually changed quite a bit in recent years. and what might motivate or deter people from consuming or buying this price of wine, their main motivations for buying wines above 20 at various levels of price level, what are their perceptions of quality? Can we map any of these attitudes or trends or behavior to specific demographics? And finally, determine if there was a cause for concern with the recent slowdown in wines over $20. Is it transitory or is it something more fundamental? Just so you know, the historic Wine Market Council definition of high-end wine consumer is someone who purchases wine costing the equivalent of $20 a 750 ml on at least a monthly basis. Or you can also add in with an asterisk people who are wine club members and get substantial shipments every 2 or 3 or 4 months, as the case may be, into that group too. As we're going to see, there's some, we mainly keep that definition for historical reasons because the whole notion of the dividing line between special occasion wines and ordinary or casual consumption wines has changed quite a bit in the last few years. Some background trends from other data. Okay, the Wine Market Council has the longest running, largest scaled consumer survey of wine drinkers in the US. They've been running it on an annual or biannual basis since 2000. And so we've got a pretty good long-term perspective on the data. It typically contains anywhere from 4,700 to 7,200 consumers are surveyed initially, then it drives down into more detail for the wine consumers. The consumer sample is balanced to represent US Census for gender, ethnicity, education level, age group, and region, and household income. So it's about as, all surveys have their issues, but it's about as representative a sample as you're going to get. And because it's large scale, we can divvy it up and look at, for instance, the high-end wine consumers. Big trend-wise, what we've seen recently is that some core wine consumers have drifted away to becoming marginal wine consumers, drinking wine less often than once a week, sometimes only every other month or so. Some marginal wine consumers over the past 5 years have been dropping out of wine consumption altogether. On the other hand, the remaining core wine consumers who drink wine once a week or more often are actually increasing wine purchases. So you've got kind of a bipolar effect here. High-end wine consumers in particular have been net increasing consumption, at least as self-reported, but that also shows up to some extent in other data. Nielsen off-premise from 2022 to now, not a happy picture. If you were at Dale's presentation earlier, you probably saw just how grim it could be at the depletion and retail scan level. There were big drops under 20, especially under 10. Those have moderated, but they're still down. $20 to $30 was healthy in 2021, but declined more recently. $30 plus grew quite a bit in 2021, went down 2022. There's one thing to keep in mind about IRI and Nielsen retail scan data, however. It way underrepresents the long tail of fine wine and neighborhood retail stores. So when you're looking at that data for wine over $20, keep that asterisk in your mind that you're missing a big chunk of the picture. However, these are the actual numbers, and you can see I've just put the negatives in red. You can see how the situation is ameliorating somewhat for year-to-date 2024, for instance, versus 2022, but still not entirely a happy picture. We also did a major study of consumers that involved actual household panel purchasing data and a survey of 1,500 wine consumers, which we did some fairly sophisticated statistical analysis on. I can bore some with the details later at the reception if you want. But what came down to is essentially the big questions were, is wine losing out to other categories, and how and why and among who? And what is driving the recent decline in wine purchases? And our conclusion was that once you held all different factors equal in statistic using random forest regression, if you want the details, what we found was that reducing other alcohol was the strongest predictor and most accurate predictor of whether you were reducing wine. In other words, wine is being caught in this sort of larger tide of cutting back on alcohol perceptions, alcohol purchases generally. And those drinking more wine, and there are some of those, were doing so because of their flavor, complementing food, more wine occasions that they've had that they think call for wine. Those people think it's part of a healthy lifestyle, quite opposite the people who are cutting back alcohol generally. And there is some, oh wait, let me tell you, we are losing some specific occasions to other drinks. Weekday dinners are being lost, especially to non-alcoholic options. Gourmet meals at home, which wine used to own, that's kind of alarming, also lost to some extent to non-alcoholic options. Casual drinks out and going out with friends and socializing and casual meals, both non-alc, but especially to cocktails and spirits. We found wine losing that. Wine was still very strong for holiday, special occasions, romantic occasions, and above all for relaxing at home where it had made actual shifting gains. Let's just look at one more source about shifting. Where is wine losing volume and where is not? Here we're looking at household panel data. Nielsen runs a panel of over 100,000 households balanced demographically to represent the U.S. as best it can. It underrepresents the high income, so do keep that in mind, although it still has a substantial number of them. Here we're looking at the data for people who buy wine over $20. This is actual purchase data. Overall, what they found was an 11% decline in this category during 2022 to early 2023. And the majority of it was again due to general category contraction. Current buyers cutting back, some people dropping out of the $20 segment altogether. There was some switching with other categories, but it actually went in several different directions. And what you see here in this graph is these are the calculations for households that were purchasing $20 wines in 2023 versus 2022. And on the left side, these are the percentage of total losses from switching to various categories of other drinks. On the right side, in the orange bars, you see the percentage of total gains made. It's a very volatile market. People are switching back all the time. So every single one of these bars actually represents a net of a certain amount of people who actually switched from, say, imported beer to wine, but more people switched from wine to imported beer on various purchase occasions. Hence, it's on the blue negative side. And that composed 7% of the total losses. So what you see here really is switching losses of import from people trading down. People were budgeting more carefully, and so a big third of the switching losses were people trading $20 plus wines for $10 to $20 wines. Also craft beer, sparkling wine, and spirits RTD. But wine, even $20 wine, gained switches from people who had gotten tired of hard seltzer. The high-end wine consumer continues to leave the under $10 segment. And that's changed the definition of kind of my casual Wednesday pizza wine that Darcen will talk about a bit later, and from straight spirits as well. One last piece of background data here before we get to the actual study. This is a slide which draws on data from 3 different sources. So what I did was convert them to an index, and then I looked at it by generation just because that's a bit more convenient and condensed than looking at age deciles, and got as close as we could in these. And what we found was that if you look at total alcohol beverage spending based on the household panel data, Generation Z indexed very low, Generation X was the highest, and the boomers and millennials were pretty close to the average. The index being comparison of the generation spending to the total spending. When it comes to volume purchased, however, boomers by far outweighed the other generations. They're purchasing a lot of the wine. And the fact that there has been alluded to before, they're cutting back on wine consumption and alcohol consumption quite a bit is probably one of the reasons you're seeing this whole, massive declines in the under 10 segment, because that was being driven in a large part by boomers. Even though we think of them as introductory wines, and they may be, the volume in that segment is very boomer dependent. On the other hand, if you index it by frequency of purchasing over $20, based on the Wine Market Council benchmark survey, what you find is the younger consumers actually purchase the high-end segment more frequently. Now, the big asterisk there is how much do they purchase, and Darcen's going to be talking a bit more about that later, because the volume and frequency have really kind of diverged in terms of, you know, the age of the consumers here. Oh, this was my last chart. I lied to you. This is actually the last chart, though, I promise. And this is long-term trends in the wine consumer population. This may not surprise many people, but this is drawing on the same Wine Market Council benchmark segmentation survey. It's been run back quite a few years. And what we found is that there was a steady, there actually was very substantial growth on the fragmentary data we have from late 90s up until around 2005. The growth moderated but was continuous up until sometime between 2010 and 2015 when it really flattened out and has recently declined in terms of the percentage of the legal drinking age population that drinks wine. On the other hand, the green bar there, that's the percentage of wine drinkers who buy $20 wine plus monthly, and that has steadily increased. It's had its ups and downs, but basically it's been on a steady rise ever since. So what you're facing now is a flat to slight, somewhat declining audience or market of people of whom a higher and higher proportion are drinking higher end wines. So it's kind of almost like a two-level industry here right now in terms of the consumer perspective. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Darcen. He's going to talk about what specifically we found out in this in-depth profile of high-end wine consumers.
Great. I'll tiptoe around here. I'll grab that from you. Well, thanks very much. Thanks, Christian. So as Christian mentioned, I get to share with you the research that the Wine Market Council commissioned for their members on high-end wine consumers. My goal today is really threefold. First, I want to share with you a little bit more about how and why this research was done. I think especially the marketers and researchers in the room will find that interesting and valuable. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the high-level results of the research to help you better understand what the motivations of this group are, what appeals to them, things that you can actually use. And then finally, hopefully I can inspire you with some of the key findings, these action items at the end that you can actually use to sell wine to the high-end wine consumer. The one thing I will mention, and just to reiterate what Christian said, this is a large multi-phase research study, and we're just giving you the highlights. So if you're interested, both of the reports are available on the Wine Market Council website for their members, if that's something you're interested in. Just to reiterate the landscape that Christian was talking about, but the last decade or so, we saw this steady upward trend of the high-end wine consumer. But the last couple of years, we saw that trend start to go down. And that was a little bit troubling, and we want to understand, is this a trend or what's going on in the marketplace? What's going on with these consumers? So an important step in understanding this market problem was to more thoroughly profile this segment of wine consumers. So this includes identifying the demographic and psychographic segments within the $20 plus purchases to see where those trends were, what's driving them, what makes them tick, and what is their relationship with wine. So as many of you know, one of the key challenges when you're working with subsegments and small subsegments of the population and wine consumers is you got to make sure that you're using the right language. You need to make sure that you're understanding what it is, what is their relationship with wine and how do they talk about wine, so that then you can then go ahead and validate it and find actionable things to take from the research. So that is why the first phase of this research was an online qualitative study. So we recruited 27 high-end wine consumers from across the country. And the goal was really to spend 3 days with them. I spent 3 days, and we had in-depth conversations to really find out, what are your values, what are your desires, what are your goals, what words do you use to describe the influences and desires with wine and your relationship with wine. And you'll see as we're going through, we use this phase to inform the second phase, the online survey. So we use those words and the findings to write the questions, to write the statements, to make sure that we could really validate what we were hearing from these consumers. The second phase then was an online survey where we took what we learned in phase one and we devised this survey and we wanted to validate it. The goal was to get a demographically representative US sample among those over the age of 21. We wanted to be able to say with confidence, this is what's going on with high-end wine consumers, this is what they believe, this is what's motivating them, and this is how we can appeal to them. So we sent out our balanced sample, we weighted it on the back end. We did this study in September and October of last year. It took 18 minutes for respondents to complete it. But the thing I really wanted to emphasize, and I think you'll find the most interesting, is how rigorous the quality control process had to be. In addition to our usual kind of gotcha questions to get the straight liners and that sort of thing, what we've been seeing in high-end research is that not necessarily everybody in the survey is actually a high-end wine consumer. And so we wanted to make sure that we can make this truly representative. So what Christian and I did is we put in some open-ended questions. What are your favorite $20 plus wines? What wines do you buy for special celebrations? Those types of things. And then we went through line by line to see what type of answers they were giving. So we had almost 11,000 people enter the survey, 1,500 plus met the criteria, and then Christian and I actually ended up having to remove over 800 respondents who weren't actually who they said they were. And it's not to say that they were necessarily lying. Their perception of their purchase behavior might have been a little higher, or they got a little excited about a category. But I just wanted to emphasize how important it is if you're doing micro-marketing towards a high-end wine consumer, you're doing research, the rigor that's required to ensure that you're talking to the right people and getting your message to the right people is a lot more intense than as if you were just talking to the general population of wine consumers. So this resulted in 747 people across the United States, a representative sample, and we can say with confidence that this makes up 7% of the adult population across the United States. So with the results, I think a fun way to start would be with the demographic profile. So as you've seen on some of the other slides, this over-indexes as male. But as Christian alluded to, I think what you'll find interesting and maybe surprising is that the largest age segment within high-end wine consumers is actually 21 to 39-year-olds. This is the biggest group within them. However, they are purchasing in the smallest quantity. So it is your smaller, older high-end wine consumers that are driving the spend and driving the sales of high-end wine consumers. But I want to point this out because it's super important that there is a lot of participation among 21 to 39-year-olds, and they're telling us that as their life stage changes, and you see that in the bottom right-hand corner, their living situation, as they get a partner and kids and a house and a stable job and their economic situation starts to improve, they want to increase their participation and abandon those lower price points. So that's why this younger, there's a lot of optimism here in terms of the younger demographic within the high-end wine consumer. The other thing in the top right-hand corner, you'll see that we over-index as multicultural. These are, and this is definitely on the younger side. And so I think we saw this in Dale's presentation as well, but he was saying, spirits do the best job with multicultural marketing and getting them in, and wine not so much. And I do want to encourage, because there's an opportunity here, because younger multicultural high-end wine consumers, they're making up a very large percentage of high-end wine consumers, but they're not participating at the rate they want to yet, but they definitely want to.
If I could just step in for a second, when we look at the total population through the Wine Marketing Council benchmark survey, you do find Hispanic in particular and African American to some extent and Asian American to some extent under-indexing for being wine consumers or for frequency of wine consumption. But the interesting thing is within these kind of core high-end wine consumers, there's a much higher representation. And they skew younger, so it's really kind of one of the few positive things we're seeing in the market right now.
Yes, definitely an opportunity. The other thing I just want to quickly point out on this slide, as you'd expect, we over-index within the 7% of the population as being higher income and higher household wealth. You might wonder, why are there some low-income individuals in here? Those generally are retirees with higher household wealth, and younger people with higher incomes have lower wealth. So that's usually what makes that up. However, there are some individuals that have low income, low wealth in here, and they tend to be a little bit more transient in terms of coming in and out of this section of the market, or they're straddling. They're buying one or two $20 plus bottles a month, but then they're also buying their 10 and 15 bottle of wine, and they'd like to graduate that up once their economic situation improves. But generally speaking, higher income, higher wealth. This is a fun slide. I lifted this directly from the report from Phase 1 Qualitative, but I wanted to show you it really is important when we're to focus our marketing efforts and on the language and the way they're describing wine and their relationship with wine. So for them, wine is relaxing and enjoying, but they use words like wine is my comforter, wine is my decompressor. These are the types of words that they're using to describe it. Wine is about social and celebration, but it is a mediator. It helps me bond with my friends. It helps me socialize and communicate with them. It's about learning and exploration. It's sensory experience. It's an adventure. When they talk about discovering new wines, and I'll talk about that in a minute, that's considered an adventure. So we can use those types of words when we're talking about, do you want to discover a new high-end wine at my winery, at my wine store? You can have an adventure, and this is part of that process. It's sophistication and indulgence. It's an integral part of their life. They've got to a point where wine is integrated into their lifestyle. It's a necessity, it's a staple, and of course the relationship with food can't be denied. The other thing with that personal connection is the memory maker, and I'm going to come back to that because as Christian alluded to, they're drinking all sorts of different types of alcohol products, but they believe overwhelmingly that the best alcohol drink to socialize and to make memories with is wine. And so if, when we're talking later about premium cocktails and craft beer and those for different occasions, these high-end wine consumers, this 7%, they would prefer to be drinking wine because they believe it is better at making memories and connecting with other people. So on these next few slides, there's bar charts, and I'll be sure to point out what I think is important. But on this slide, how does somebody become a high-end wine consumer? Well, you see the thing at the very top, a $20 wine, a wine over $20 greatly impressed me. I refer to this as a gateway wine. I think this is something we can probably all relate to in this wine. At some point in their life, they had an experience with a wine where they went, this is different, this is interesting, this is making me curious about what is going on here. So I really want to emphasize the importance of making sure that wine drinkers have this gateway experience, whether that's at a winery, at a wine store, at a wine tasting with their friends. They need to have that experience. For me, it was my first time through wine country in my early 20s. Started trying these high-end wines. It's like, wow, this is amazing. There's something different going on here. The next two are interrelated to this, because the word that these consumers often use is once they've had their gateway wine, it made them curious. That's the word that kept coming up time and time again. This made me curious about wine. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to discover more. I wanted to keep trying it. And this leads to the integration of wine into their lifestyle. All of a sudden, they're keeping more wines in their house. They're cooking with wine. They're having wine over with their friends. They're ordering at restaurants. It becomes totally integrated into their lifestyle. So that's a really important kind of transition of how somebody becomes a high-end wine drinker. The other thing I really want to emphasize that comes up a lot, as what did for me, was visiting a wine region. So, we heard in the keynote lecture this morning how they're trying to make the winery experience different and attractive to millennials and Gen Zs. But this is really important because it's not just about the gateway wine, it's the gateway experience into wine. It's about getting them curious and excited about wine. And one of the easiest and best ways to do that is to get them out into wine country and enjoying wine at a winery. So what is it about high-end wine that these consumers like so much? Well, it's about quality wine. And the number one thing is, when they say that this is a quality wine, what they're saying is it needs to be consistent from bottle to bottle, vintage to vintage. They know that when they spend over $20 on a bottle of wine, they know they're very likely going to enjoy it. That's what we heard time and time again. It's about consistency. The other things that you'll notice on here, and I really like that quote, the level of flavors must balance well and must be consistent in the quality from bottle to bottle. It's about that consistency, it's about complexity, it's about balance. And sometimes I think we don't know if a consumer knows what complexity and balance are, but with high-end wine consumers, they generally do, even if they're not able to articulate exactly what that means, they know what it means to them. So that's what a quality wine is. It's consistent, it's balanced, it's complex. The other thing that's important is, what is it not? And a common theme that came up throughout both phases of the research is that when you spend under $20 on a bottle of wine, you're taking a risk. They believe that, whether it's true or not, that additives and preservatives are being added, that sugar is being added. They talked about experiences of getting a hangover and not feeling good afterwards. But once you start spending more than $20 on a bottle of wine, this is no longer the case. So there's a huge opportunity here to lean into that. Talk about the quality of your grapes, your viticulture practices, that when you're drinking our wine, you're really tasting the terroir of the place. This is the type of messaging that really resonates with them because of the experiences they've had with lower quality wines.
Yeah, one thing that was really interesting, I'm not sure if it's in this presentation or not, was that we asked people, under what circumstances would you try a new wine from a region or variety you didn't know? And a substantial number of people said, it's much less risky to try a new wine above $20 because I'm pretty sure I'll like it, whereas I might be saving money trying it under $20, but there'll be a much higher chance that I might not like it. And that's their perception.
Yeah, exactly. This next slide, there's a lot of numbers, but there's a couple things I really want you to take away from this. This is, we ask people, how much do you spend on wine for certain occasions? And what's really interesting here is the top three, holiday meals, bringing to a friend's house, a gourmet sit-down meal, those all get into the kind of the more premium price points, 40, 50 and above, as we might expect. But the next two, relaxing at home after work or weekend, the weekday dinner, these are also over $20. And so the key message here is high-end wine is for every occasion. It really is that Tuesday after work, Wednesday supper, relaxing with your friends on a Thursday. It's not just the special occasions anymore. The second thing I really wanted to point out here was that younger multicultural wine drinkers are more likely to splurge on wine for these events. So again, they're not purchasing in as much quantities, but when they do, they're willing to spend more. And that's why this is a positive finding, because they're telling us that as their economic situation allows, as their life stage allows, they want to continue to graduate up into this price point. And once they do, they're willing to spend more.
The other thing that really popped out about this was just how much they were willing to spend on the weekday dinner at home. Now, it is a bit skewed, towards the cheaper, and then there's a long tail that drags the average up a bit. But really, the whole notion of like your everyday wine being a $10 wine, a $12 wine, or whatever, that was true, say, 10 years ago. For high-end wine consumers, they are willing to pop a $25, $30 wine open on sort of almost any occasion, which I think has implications for things like second labels, secondary varieties, sort of more casual house wines or gateway wines from high-end wine producers, even those who are primarily in the direct-to-consumer, and selling to people off your website or club. I think to keep that in mind, that you're no longer entirely in a special occasion kind of environment in terms of the consumption of your wine.
Yeah. This next slide, the frequency of purchase by price point. The main takeaway I want here before I show you the next slide is this push to the middle. You can see that high-end wine consumers are abandoning the more inexpensive wines, and they are driving into that 20 to 29 category and 30 to 49. So there really is that push. Those still drinking at the inexpensive price points, the main drivers of that, one is some still like to have a little cheaper wine to cook with, or for friends that might not appreciate it. And the second reason is there are those in here that are still kind of straddling the line. They have some high-end wine, they have some cheaper wine because they can't afford to graduate completely at this time. But the rest of this subsegment is pushing up higher into that $20 to $50 range. I have two slides that kind of show the same thing, and I really want to talk about it because I think you'll find it super interesting. It's this purchasing trend. We asked these respondents, are you purchasing more, the same, or less at each price point? And really a couple of takeaways here. This is where you can really see that push to the middle. They're absolutely abandoning those lower price points, and they're also reducing their spend at the higher price points as well. So that is definitely a real thing. There really is a squish to the middle, and that helps explain some of these trends that we're seeing with these high-end wine consumers, is that push to the middle. So who is driving this switch? This is the same numbers, just with a little bit more information, but it really is the 21 to 39-year-olds. These are the consumers that are abandoning at that under 10, and even at that not as much as that 10 to 19, and going up into that 20 to 29. That's where that shift is coming from, that abandoning the lower, going to the higher. A couple other things I really wanted you to take away from this slide. The best predictor of somebody graduating price points is self-identified wine knowledge. If somebody considers themselves a novice wine drinker in this category, they're very likely to still be straddling the line and drinking a cheaper wine now and again. But if somebody identifies as intermediate, they're more likely to start purchasing 20 to 29, even that 30 to 39. And if somebody identifies as an expert, that's when we start to see them purchasing the $50 plus on a more regular basis. So getting them curious about wine, learning about wine, talking about wine is incredibly important to graduating up. So that's the other thing that I really want to take away, and this leads into the next slide. Another predictor is as somebody graduates up these price points, they're more likely to start having more wine at home and storing wine at home. And that's what this next slide is all about. I think the first thing that you might find interesting about how much wine high-end wine consumers are storing at home is that over half have less than a case at home right now. And it's really driven, again, by self-identified wine knowledge. If you consider yourself a novice, you are very likely to have less than 6 bottles at home. As you get intermediate, you're likely to have a case or 2 or 3 and starting to join wine clubs. And as you consider yourself an expert, that's where you start building out your wine collection a little bit more. The other predictor here is age and income. So as you get older and your life stage changes, maybe you got a little bit more space in your house, that's when you start collecting. But what's really important to a high-end wine consumer is having a good mix available. They want a red and a white for different meals. They want ultra expensive versus 20 to 29 for a Tuesday night. They want a good mix, a good, nice eclectic mix, something to discover, a wine that they've had before. So within that case of wine sitting on their counter, there's a real nice mix going on. So what would influence somebody to purchase one high-end wine over another? Well, not surprisingly, the biggest is still recommendations from people they trust, friends and family. But a couple things that I really want to emphasize on this slide is the importance of point of sale. This is a common theme that we heard in both phases of the research, but this knowledgeable store staff at a restaurant, at a winery, at their favorite wine store, wherever they happen to be purchasing wine, they want to talk about it. And this is what it means to learn about wine. So a couple of the comments that we heard was, I love explaining what I like. I love learning, I love talking. Or I love having a conversation with someone that knows more than I do. So there's a real opportunity when you're dealing with a high-end wine consumer, ask them what they're drinking, ask them why they like that wine. Get them to start talking about the different attributes and what got them excited, what got them curious, and then make a recommendation for another wine based on that. They love having those conversations, and that's how they will often choose between one or the other. As you go up in price point up to $50 plus, that's where the expert and reviews start to matter a little bit more. The other thing I wanted to focus on was the bottom 3, wine apps, influencers, and celebrity endorsements, because we've heard a lot of that in some of the other presentations. Those are at the bottom, but they highly over-index to 21 to 39-year-old, overwhelmingly so. And I know when it comes to influencers and celebrities, not all of us can afford Snoop Dogg like we saw this morning or Martha Stewart. But a project that I just did last year for a small high-end winery, they were launching a new brand. So we found 15 artists with a good social media presence. We sent them a couple bottles of wine. We asked them to paint a picture being inspired by the sensory experience of that wine. So they were drinking the wine, they were painting. We asked them to articulate it the best they could. Of course, they filmed the whole thing, and then they push it out through all their social media channels to a different audience than that winery had ever had before. We then took the finished art, and we put it on the labels of this new brand. And so again, these artists started pushing it out through their social media channels, and we started selling a lot of wine that way. So using micro-influencers for a lot of wineries is going to be a more realistic way, and there's a lot of ways you can have fun with that and open up new channels and new audiences for your wine. So what are their attitudes towards different price segments of wine? Well, throughout both phases of this research, there was this theme of quality over quantity. Once you go over 20, it's hard to go back. They would rather have one $30 bottle than 3 $10 bottle. So there really was this search for a quality wine, and they've told us what a quality wine is. It's complex, it's consistent, it's balanced. And you can see the number 3 on this list. Again, it's this theme that over and over again that cheaper wines often have sugar or additives. Cheaper wines give me a hangover. So when I'm thinking about what price to purchase, and I want this quality over quantity because I've had a bad experience with a more inexpensive wine. And so we can really, once again, lean into that as a way to really promote the terroir of your winery. These are grapes. We are making wine the way Mother Nature intended. We are organic and biodynamic, and this is what it means. We don't just put the sticker on the label. They actually want to know what you're doing in the vineyard to make your organic, biodynamic, certified sustainable, whatever that may be. So how do they discover new wines at $20 plus price point? How do they have that adventure? Well, I think the one at the top here, a friend's house for drinks or dinner, that really encompasses exactly what I've been talking about here. It's social, it's time with people, it's about making memories, it's about food, it's about lifestyle. These are all the things that we can use in our messaging of discovering new wines. The other thing I want to emphasize once again is that point of sale, that on-premise, that glass at a restaurant. That's a fun way to discover new wine, is having that conversation with the person at the restaurant, that sommelier, and getting that recommendation. A person at the wine store, at a tasting event. This is all trial, but it's usually through that conversation with somebody that knows more about wine than they do. So having those conversations with them is super important. The other thing I really wanted to emphasize is that discovery is the travel. On most of these questions, you'll see that the importance of getting people out to wine country. I think we saw from MJ, she was talking about what are the other things that wine travelers like to do. I just finished a project for the Naramata wine region in British Columbia, and what we found is that people that go there often bring their bikes. So what we did is we created self-guided biking tours that stop at different wineries, and we created a number of different ones depending on the different segments of wine drinkers. So we have an e-bike tour that's been super popular. We have bikes that go by historical places. We have bikes that are more about the education of wine, so it stops at different vineyards and talks about that. And so encouraging people, if you're bringing your bikes anyways, make sure you're now biking on one of our routes, whichever one appeals to you, and stopping in at these wineries. So there's lots of fun ways that you can kind of engage people and get them out.
Just an interesting footnote to that one is that you might think that sort of influencers and celebrity-based wines are not upscale, so to speak, but in fact, the regular buyers of $50 plus wines had somewhat higher association of purchasing wines recommended by an influencer I follow or referred to by some celebrity or things like that. So that was a kind of a surprise.
Yeah. One more thing I really wanted to emphasize on this slide, and Christian alluded to it, but that $20 to $30 category, that is for discovery. That is for trying new things. There, over and over again, people said there's less risk in trying a 20 to 30 because I know it's going to be high quality. I know I'm probably going to like it, or at least it's not going to make me feel bad. So that's the discovery. That $30 to $50 range, that's when they generally need to sample or trial it first. And the $50 plus range is where they start looking to critics and reviews and awards and things like that. So that's kind of the three categories that will drive somebody to discover within each of those price points. A common theme that we heard in the qualitative was this idea of switching, that they still love wine and the high-end wine consumer isn't going to be abandoning wine anytime soon. However, they are willing to make trade-offs for certain occasions and with certain people. One of those is the premium or gourmet cocktail. Many said that they still like to have wine with their meals. Overwhelmingly, when they're having a meal, they like to have wine. But before the meal, they'll often have a cocktail. This includes at home because they start to have fun mixing with these fresh ingredients and looking for these fun recipes. And so this is absolutely a real thing and a real trend. Consumers between 21 and 39 and females are the ones that are most likely to do this. But it's absolutely something that is impacting the amount of high-end wine they're consuming and discovering at the places that I've been talking about. There's a couple of ways that we can combat this. We saw actually in a couple of the presentations today where people are coming out with their own RTDs. I think Snoop Dogg had one, something in a can. Another fun way, I'm working with a high-end winery right now, and we're finding micro-influencers with a kind of different unique channels through their social media, and we're sending them wine and a wine cocktail recipe. And we're telling them on camera, make this cocktail with these fresh ingredients, make sure you use this wine that we're sending you, talk about why you need this wine to complement the flavors, and then push it out to your social media channels. And then link in the bio for the recipe to try yourself, make sure you order wine from this winery sort of thing. So that's been a really fun way to kind of, if you can't beat them, join them. They're making these cocktails anyways, just make sure they're using your high-end wine. So that's been a really fun project that we've been doing. Or things like Snoop Dogg, where can you make a wine cocktail recipe? Can you do something with alternative packaging and RTDs? So something to think about because this trend of gourmet cocktails is absolutely real, as is premium beer. So we've seen that for occasions and people that they're with, they'll often make that switch. However, I put this up in the top right-hand corner. Remember, 84% believe that Wines are the best for making memories. Wine is better at building genuine conversations and connections than beer or cocktails. So this 7%, they would rather be using wine. So it's just finding a way for them to use it in these occasions and with these social situations. So what I want to leave you with is 10 quick actionable takeaways, a quick summary of what I've been talking about. The first, marketing message. You need to make sure that you're using the words that they're using to describe wine. When they're discovering new wine, they're having an adventure. It's about making a memory. It's about connecting with friends. It's an integral part of their life. They've gotten to a point where wine is mixed up into all their aspects of their life. So it's important to make sure that we're using the messaging and sentiments that are important to them and get them excited and, remember, curious about wine. Quality and consistency. Remember, there is less risk because I am more likely to enjoy it when I spend over $20. Emphasize the quality. Again, consistency, complexity, and balance. These are words that we can use to describe the wine that they're wanting to try. Wine and cocktails, I gave you some examples of how people are trying to combat this, but this is absolutely a real trend where people are making that substitute. Can you come up with a wine cocktail recipe? Is there RTD options? Is there alternative packaging options that you can think about for that 21 to 39-year-old category to help with this trend? Remember, I wanted to emphasize that the largest subsegment is within age is that 21 to 39-year-old, and they're becoming more and more diverse. As Dale was saying in that previous presentation, the spirits category has done an amazing job of attracting and getting people interested from that young multicultural group. Wine can take a lot of notes from that because this is a growing and becoming more important group. And as Christian said, this is a really positive thing. We just need to focus in on it.
I think this also has implications at the direct-to-consumer level too, because there's certainly a need to attract younger and more diverse audiences and do things that interest them in the tasting room. And one theme that's come up repeatedly is this notion that they're willing to splurge more often, but they're not going to accumulate wine the same way. They're not buying in the same volume. What does that translate to at DTC? It translates to much less likely to join the club, but that doesn't mean you lose them as customers. And I've noticed in doing projects for individual wineries, I'm going to bet you ran across this too, is that there's been a real focus on club membership, and that is a good thing because, in terms of cash flow and so on, clubs are the best, et cetera. But don't neglect the kind of people who will buy ad hoc. And that's especially true for this group under 40. They'll buy from your website, anticipating a special occasion, or because some wine you sent them really clicks with their kind of particular experience or interest, or maybe it's easily affordable for a splurge and you say, hey, we've got this new wine to try, why don't you give it a try at this special discount? All these kind of one-off ad hoc marketing really fits this finding in the study.
Yeah. Recommendation and trial, I really wanted to emphasize that $20 to $30, that's for discovery, that's for adventure, that's for trying new things, and that's where we can really help them out by making sure there's that gateway wine available for them to try. That 30 to 50 usually requires trial and sampling, and again, over 50 probably requires some reviews. I really wanted to emphasize the importance of wine travel. That was my gateway experience, and we heard this morning in the keynote how important that gateway experience is for getting young people excited and curious about wine. So thinking about how to get people out to the wineries and how to get them excited once they're there, to have that gateway wine experience, to talk about wine and get them excited about what they can learn about it is super important. Wine occasions, the thing I really wanted to emphasize here, yes, that link between food and wine is super strong. It's really important. They're keeping wine on hand for this exact purpose. But again, high-end wine is for any occasion with this group, and that's something really important in your messaging when you're selling wine. It can be Tuesday after work. It can be Wednesday supper. It can just be a casual drink with a friend because that's about making memories, and that's part of their lifestyle. Pricing, 30's the new 20. And there's that push to the middle. People are reducing their ultra premium spend, but they're graduating up their price points. So if possible, making sure there's gateway wines available for people to try in that 20 to 30 category is super important. Remember that one of the most important themes we heard in this is that there's that perception that under $20, people are adding sugar and additives and preservatives, and it's going to give me a headache, and it's not going to make me not feel good. So really leaning into, when you're selling your wine, leaning into your viticulture and agricultural practices and talking about how they can enjoy the terroir of your wine. We're making, these are the grapes, here's a picture of the vineyard, and it's going right into your bottle. That to them is a quality bottle of wine, and that's what they're looking for. If you talk about sustainable and organic, don't just put the sticker on the label. They want to understand what it is you're doing to be sustainable, organic, biodynamic. And finally, consider the alcohol level. The one thing that I've been talking about is these different occasions. When they're switching to craft beer, when they're switching to cocktails. Can you find low or no alcohol options for them to enjoy in these different social situations when they are making those trade-offs? So, whether it's like we saw in the opening presentation this morning, finding that 7 to 9% alcohol in the can, or if you can get a 0% option for those that want to enjoy it, or looking at what they consider a healthy option, that's something that you might want to consider as well. So I hope that these action items are something that you can use in selling wine to these high-end wine consumers.
Yeah, I'd like to add, if you don't think high-quality, regional, or terroir-specific wine can be made with no alcohol, I urge you to try the wines from Leitz in Germany. Leitz Einschweig Dry Riesling really delivers Rheingau Riesling aroma and character. Yeah, it's a little short in the finish, but it really delivers the classic character that people are probably looking for when they buy that kind of wine, conventional wine. So I know it's harder to do with some wines than others, but certainly we shouldn't give up on a high-end non-alcohol or very low alcohol experience.
Yeah. Did you want to share a couple things here, or do you want to go to Q&A?
I think we can go to Q&A to see. Oh, wait, I did have final thoughts. Thank you for reminding me. You were so comprehensive. I figured there was nothing more to say. Yeah, I mean, the first thing a lot of people did ask us, sort of when we first were, commissioning this study, was like, oh, is it a turning point, this decline in high-end sales? I don't think it's necessarily a turning point. High-end consumers have moved towards the middle. That was partly economic concerns, but the fact is a lot of the economic behavior indicators, things like starting new businesses, job quits, et cetera, adding new positions, employment stats, et cetera, those that reflect actual behavior have actually been much more robust than any of the consumer confidence indicators. And there's a real separation. That's some interesting academic papers on this, on why this is happening, people's economic sentiment and perception of the economy versus their actual behavior. Also, remember, demographic fundamentals, especially for high-end wine consumers, are very much in their favor. So something that you see as a trend for the overall economy may not apply to this particular segment. The big trend has been a broad reduction in alcohol consumption, especially among the youngest and the oldest age segments. But you can be, high-end wine consumers are very involved with the product, and as we've seen, would rather have one really good wine than 3 pretty good wines at a lower price. You're probably going to be sort of last man standing in this particular. If people are going to drink alcohol, reduce their alcohol occasions, the remaining ones might as well be for the best, and that's where high-end wine can stand tall in there. And you do have some unique selling propositions that other even cocktails can't really replicate. The fact it's a natural, agricultural, less manipulated product. This whole social connection, romance, and relaxing themes, very, very strong for wine. I think what's happened is between the general reduction in alcohol consumption, and there have been several tailwinds. We've had it easy in a way for the period from the late 90s to around 2010 to 2015, because wine was exactly where consumers were headed in terms of all food and beverage and drink. They wanted more complexity, they wanted more intense flavors, they wanted more upscale products, they wanted more interesting products. Wine was already there with all those attributes. It took beer and spirits and so on a while to catch up. They've caught up now. You can do all those things in almost any beverage alcohol category. So that's part of the reason why it's a little bit tougher now than it used to be. And I'm a little bit worried that we can no longer assume this sort of steady infusion of new core wine consumers. It is, to some extent, a battle for share out there, because we had this enormous influx of marginal wine consumers becoming core wine consumers in the early 2000s, a bunch of those core wine consumers becoming high-end wine consumers. We don't have that kind of as big a push from the bottom up as we used to. The good news is, for most small producers, a fight for share is really just about executing your marketing and sales well. It's not like you're in a situation where you have 10% of the market and you're fighting someone who has 20% of the market for 1% of that market, and everyone's very aware of what they're doing. If you have 0.0001% of the market, you can double your sales, and no one's even going to notice in the competitive sense. So it's not quite as scary, the battle for share, as it sounds if you're in the high-end wine market, which is very fragmented.
I want to thank Christian and Darcen for your time here today. Guys, thank you so much.